Was there something that stands out that you were vehemently opposed to, that wound up going through and wound up being the disaster that you thought it would be?
About everything. Have everybody there to say, look at
the photo
me,
op, right?
The photo op.
Yeah,
That's what they do. I don't do photo ops.
The bickering and the name calling and the insults, and I mean there was a lot of drama.
Yeah, that certainly was. You know, when you get kicked in the nuts, and then they're still, edit that. And then what happens is they, the sad thing is about politicians, you get lots of ego and you get lots of narcissism. That if you try to share something with somebody objectively, they take that as an insult. And he said, if you care about somebody, you tell them the truth. If you care about yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. I've tried to always tell the truth. The people that I helped get elected, for lack of better words, kind of, were two-faced.
Welcome to No Holds Barred. I'm Rich Roth, and my guest today, former City Councilman Jeff Helgeson, joins me. What's up, Jeff? How are you?
Man, it is great to be with you. I'm glad we're not talking about sports, even though there's lots of good things I would love to talk about sports.
Well,
but
there's no saying. I mean,
we're good for. I'm glad to be here on your inaugural show.
Well, I appreciate you joining me, and there's nothing to say we can't talk a little sports. I know you wrestled at Liberty, and we were talking just kind of leading up to this about just the growth of Liberty, and obviously a New Year's Day Bowl a year ago, and we saw an amazing run by the softball team. I mean, sports at Liberty, it really, the dream Dr. Falwell had years ago, it's come true.
Absolutely. And the girls' field hockey. They took second in NCAA Division I. They were in the finals and lost to a perennial powerhouse, Northwestern. I had several of the girls in my class. I didn't know anything about field hockey. I grew up in Minnesota where you're kind of assuming the ice hockey, so I asked them, when do you throw off the gloves? But they said, we don't do that in field hockey. They dance around in their cute little skirts and stuff. They're not throwing blows.
So, all right, so you grew up in Minnesota, you came here, you went to Liberty, you're a financial advisor, you also are a professor at Liberty in Sweetbriar, you do that for your full-time job, you got involved in politics of city council, 20 years on city council, and that came to an end last year, and the idea today is let's talk about a little bit of everything, but like I told you in advance of this, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you was because I no longer live in the city. I've lived in Bedford County for approximately 10 years, and even when I lived in the city, I was never big into city politics, city council, what's going on. It was never my thing, but then all of a sudden, the Republicans take over, the crap hits the fan, and it became must-see. I don't know if it's TV or what it was, but it's like you couldn't miss it because there was drama and a circus-like atmosphere around city council, and you were kind of right in the middle of it. And I've always wanted to know what was all going on, and I figured now that you're no longer there, maybe you're willing to share a little bit.
Absolutely. Happy to.
What before we dive into that, though, I mean, take me through the process. You grew up in Minnesota. You want to talk about a political crap show that state is right now.
My goodness.
My wife grew up there. We just had my in-laws in for my son's graduation, and they were telling me what a zoo it is, what a disaster. I mean,
it's so sad, and you're seeing it resurrect itself in L.A. right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're watching riots where the inmates are running the asylum. I mean, when the inmates are getting out of hand, the police should bust their skulls, throw them in jail, and be done. But now they got to be so walk on eggshells at somewhat. Minneapolis, not far from where I grew up, about $2 billion of property was damaged. What does that do to the taxpayers? What does that do to the business owners and the people that own property there that normally would say, okay, I'm paying high taxes, and normally I pick up the phone and I call 911 and the fire department comes or the police come. They did nothing. It was just rotten. And so now you're looking at it as a person, not necessarily in politics, but a businessman or an investor. You want to take your hard-earned capital and invest it there? Or you're going to say, I'm going to go somewhere else because you have a pattern of just, and that's kind of a liberal ideology that it doesn't help to create or allow people to invest in that place and grow. So that was just terrible. I don't know how anybody would rebuild any of those things. You get your insurance money and you say, I'm going to the counties or I'm going somewhere different.
You know, you talk about politics nowadays, and you know, I was kind of talking about how my interest in city council grew a couple of years ago because of, you know, the circus-like atmosphere. But politics in general, and I did a sports show on this station for a lot of years, and it really started feeling a number of years ago like politics was becoming almost like sports in the sense that some of these events, you know, you almost want to pull up a chair and throw a party and get your favorite adult beverage and snacks and watch a debate or watch, because, you know, it's gotten so much different than it was just, I don't know, what, 10 years ago? I mean, and it feels like it really kind of started with Trump because of, you know, he's just such a polarizing figure, but now that's obviously trickled down to the state and even the local level.
And, you know, and I think the thing has changed somewhat because the players, you know, you're talking about sports. And so I would make not analogy with just sports in general, but more the WWE because it's fictitious. So you're watching people that are politicians that get up and say something that they said 180 degrees opposite to 3 years ago than they're saying today because it's a Republican versus a Democrat in charge. And they changed that. Same thing that happens on city government. You know, in any government, for crying out loud, you're dealing with people. You're dealing with people that have egos, people that want to push something, or they may not have that deep of a knowledge of it. I'm glad I didn't run for office just to run for office. I was recruited to run for office, and people said, hey, use your financial planning skills, your objectivity, looking at facts and figures. What is really, truly best, as opposed to what is just a neat little soundbite that sounds good today, or I can take credit, or I can get this, or I can get that. We need people that are actually adults that have experience, and they're using that experience to help further their community, whether it be a local city or a county or a state or, the federal government.
You talked about your background as a, you know, in finance, as a financial advisor. We mentioned earlier that you're a professor at Liberty and Sweetbriar. Why did you choose that? I mean, you know, talk a little bit about the fact that you came from Minnesota. You came here to go to Liberty?
Yeah, I came here to go to wrestle at Liberty and study finance. I wanted to go to a Christian school that had wrestling. My freshman year, I went to a school in Minnesota. Fortunately, I worked hard and I won the nationals there. And then from that, then I came to Liberty to wrestle, and they had finance degree. I always wanted to do that from a kid. I always kind of knew that I was going to be in finance, a financial planner. You know, it's interesting, my credits. I had the exact number of credits. A lot of times people have, I had a few extra here and there. It's like, no, I had to pay for them. Wrestling helped pay for some, but I had to pay for a bulk of it. And so I wasn't going to be wasting money on extra classes and extra credits that I didn't need. Why? And so I had the exact number. As soon as I finished my undergraduate, I started my MBA, and wrestling paid for a couple of those classes, which was nice in the tail end. After I finished that, I continued my education as a chartered financial consultant and kept on going because that is my area. You know, lots of people, have desires or aspirations, but I think God put on my heart that, hey, here's what I want you to do.
Tell me about the economic environment that we're living in right now and the advice you're giving to your clients. I mean, the market's up and down, the tariffs. It feels like Trump can, toy with the market whenever he wants to. Just say, I'm thinking about doing this, or I'm thinking about, and the market's up or the market's down. I mean, it's got to be a difficult time to be a financial advisor.
No, it's a great time. It's just what it is. My whole plan, my entire time, been financial advisor for about 35 years, has been kind of like when you think about the stock market going up and down every day, kind of like flipping a yo-yo, right? You flip that yo-yo, but then now you start walking up a set of stairs. Oh, that market goes up and down every day, just like your yo-yo. But as you progress up the set of stairs, guess what? Your account's grown. And get good things, get good advice, get good asset allocation, and leave it. You take out money when you need it, put money in when you have it. And don't be worrying about these little short-term fluctuations, because somebody can sneeze and it can change. And don't do that.
Do you have you been getting a lot of calls from clients worried about what's going on?
No, because I've been through all these things. It was funny. I was with somebody the other day. We talked about Y2K. Remember Y2K? You
I
probably
do.
weren't even born yet, but
Well, maybe not Kira.
Yeah,
but
yeah. But I mean, Y2K, the world was going to end, right? Mm-hmm. When it went from 1999 to the year 2000. Well, guess what? 2007 and 8. What happened? Every day the market's dropping another, and people said, "Oh man, we lost so much." No, you didn't. Look at what your account was in 2009 versus that dip in 2007 and 8. If you're investing for next week, you shouldn't be investing. Mm-hmm. If you're investing for your future, your serious money, we're good.
Tell me about teaching finance and the youth of today. I mean, I have a couple kids. One just graduated high school, the other's in college, and I see them. I see their friends. Maybe I'm the old guy now. Get off my lawn. I mean, I've been told that quite a bit, but kids seem very different today. What's it like teaching them?
So the thing was, I've been fortunate to have a great education. I've been fortunate to have great parents, great friends, lots of just fantastic things. Then I started watching how a younger generation was influenced pretty good by these little media 6-second sound bites. Mm-hmm. Like, oh my goodness, unless you care about somebody, if you don't care about somebody, that's why you don't want to raise minimum wage. Or you don't care about somebody, that's why you're if you care about somebody, you would ban these payday lending institutions and all of these things that have a nice 6-second ring to them, but they don't have a long-term economic viable theory that goes with it. So as I'm watching this kind of stuff, and as I've lived a long time, I thought, I want to give back what I've learned, and I think I can do that fairly well with my experiences, both in financial advising plus all my experience in government, watching how things actually work. I thought, I want to start teaching. I want to,
At what point was that? I mean,
I started in 2019.
Okay, because you've been a financial advisor, you said, for about 32 years.
35
years.
1989.
And then city council for 20 years, so about a 15-year gap before you got into politics?
Yeah.
Once you started?
Yep.
And then, it was another, 15 years before you started teaching.
Yeah.
So, but the decision to do that was you wanted to give back?
One, I wanted to give back, and two, and that's, I know that sounds, altruistic, but it's, I wanted to make sure there was another generation that would not look at things just and believe it, but actually critical thinking, like you get in finance, actually looking at something objectively rather than just sheer emotion. So that's what I wanted. And I thought, I wanted to see these kids move forward. And so with that, I started teaching at Liberty. Great kids, great. We believe in, Dr. Falwell. I knew him. He was there at my first campaign. The mission of training champions for Christ is not just being, good at something, but you're working actually specifically for your employer, of course, but for the Lord's watching. And you do that wholeheartedly. And so, and recognizing, watching academia, how it's kind of big schools have they started teaching stuff like DEI and stuff that's, you get to do what you want. Well, the beautiful thing about liberty is that you have absolutes. The absolutes come from the fact that you have a creator. You have a creator God. So teaching finance was, we look at things objectively. We look at facts. And so with that, I wanted to do that. And so the kids have been fantastic. I mean, I work out there, and I love seeing the kids when I'm out there lifting, and they're looking at the old guy barely having a bad hip and a bad back, and it's like, whoa, hey, you did that weight. So that was kind of impressive, but it's fun for me. So,
you touched on it earlier. You grew up in Minnesota. You wanted to go to a school where you could wrestle, and it had, a religious affiliation. You teach at Liberty. You've talked about you follow Liberty sports. You're a big believer in the mission of Liberty.
Absolutely.
What was it like for you a few years ago when the crap hit the fan with Jerry Jr. and yeah, I mean, and other things too, right? I mean, the rape allegations, the sexual assault. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on in Liberty
Yeah,
that was very much unlike what the Liberty Way is
yeah.
supposed to be
Hey,
about.
and with that, growing up, I came here in '85, so I've been here for 40 years. And so with that, you see ups and downs. I saw Liberty when they didn't have any money because of the PTL Jim Baker scandal, which cut off funding for Old Time Gospel Hour when the time that there were, couldn't pay employees for a couple weeks. But there's always outliers. There's always things that happen in anything, but you look at what they're doing. There's now a record attendance this year, enrollment, like over 16,000 on campus. You have growth like you've never seen. You see, like you mentioned, the Division I athletics that are competing. Softball in the Sweet 16, beating the number 1 seed. I mean, it's impressive. And so with those things, again, almost is akin to what I talked about with the stock market. There's a yo-yo. There's things that go up and down. In politics, I had a good saying that I got from the Leadership Institute, Morton Blackwell, that said, keep your eye on the main chance and don't stop to kick every barking dog. There's a lot of barking dogs. There's a lot of things.
But I mean, that scandal though, it was a big deal, right? It's Jerry Falwell Jr., right? His dad was so well known. He built the school. It's a religious school, kind of held to a higher standard, and that whole thing happens, and its reputations come into question. And now we're a few years past that. Has it rebuilt its reputation? In your opinion?
Yeah, and I see Jonathan, I see Don DeCostin, the president, I see the faculty over there, I see the kids in the gym. Just yesterday, let me tell you something. I'm out there lifting, and a kid that's on the track team. We're sitting there, and he said, "Oh, hey, and I said, "Yeah, I can't do much because I hurt my back." And he said, he's a junior. He said, "You mind if I pray for you?" And I was like, "Sure." I was at the gym yesterday. A kid that's on the track team. Again, it's easy to look at these barking dogs or these things that are there. A kid that you wouldn't have thought, just out of the blue. Big, strong kid, throwing up some weight like nobody's business. Can I pray for you? I mean, it almost brought me to tears, recognizing that mission that Dr. Falwell started as far as training champions for Christ is alive and well. There's things, I get it. But my gosh, that's nice.
Jeff Helgeson, our guest here on No Holds Barred, got it right again.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about City Council. 15 years after you graduate, you're a professional, you're a financial advisor. What made you get into politics?
So with it, and I think that's a good thing for anybody to do. The way, I kind of got into it kicking and screaming, struggling. Not struggling, but not wanting to do it. I always thought of, you heard Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx never wanted to be a member of a club that would have him for a member. It's like, think of politicians the same way. The politicians that are elbow and saying, "Oh, I want to be in charge. I want to do this." Those are people that I really kind of question, because it's their ambition. That's good. But the ambition for what? For them, for notoriety, for fame, so they can make a name for themselves. I had been doing lots of things in the community, in my church, with the Sunday school class, with the JCs, with a community group, with the Chamber of Commerce. I was in a group with there and doing financial planning and looking things objectively. And so I had several people that have been in government before said, "We would like you to use your financial experience and education to help make sure the city lives within its means." And it's amazing the things when you asked me to do this, I didn't share why I agreed. But back in college, I read this book by Charlie Tremendous Jones. Said "Life is Tremendous" was the title. Small little book. And in there, which stuck with me, said when somebody asks you to do something, try to say yes. because it adds another key on your ring of life experiences. And it's been amazing the different things that I've gotten into because people have asked me. I wasn't seeking it myself. You know, Lord opens doors, shuts doors, and when it's clearly open, you walk through it. And it's been a heck of a life.
So you talk about using your financial background to help make sure that the right decisions are being made financially.
Yep.
When I was talking with Brian Wiegand, a guy you know well,
Yep.
and I said, "Tell me a little bit about Jeff."
Yeah.
And we had a great conversation about you. But the big thing that I took away from what he told me was the thing about Jeff, and every government or board or whatever needs a guy like him, because he was always asking, do we need to do this? Right? Do we need to spend the money to build this? Do we need to? And some things obviously worked out, other things didn't work out. But I mean, was that kind of the mindset that you had when you jumped in?
Yeah, absolutely. And two, when you understand economics, I mean, when you and I go out to lunch, what do we care about? We care about the price of the lunch because it's our money, and we care about the quality of the lunch because we're eating it.
Right.
That's a first-party purchase economically. Now you take it to government. You're actually a third-party purchase. Do they care about the money? Whose money are they spending? Not their own. They hit a button and they take somebody's money. Are they the one using that bridge? Are they the one using that school system? No. So they don't care about the price, nor do they care about the quality. And why do you have just humongous runaway budgets? Why do you have delays? Why do you have this billion-dollar bridge out in California that's still not even close to being done? Or 100 billion or whatever the thing is? Because that's what happens in government. And so with that, the understanding of economics, how to try to maybe minimize that.
When you spent 20 years on council, and obviously there were plenty of wins and plenty of losses. You started out, you were the only Republican.
Yep.
So you had a lot of uphill battles. What is there one, and I know you touched on this earlier, that you hate these type of questions, but when you look back, was there something that stands out that you were vehemently opposed to, that wound up going through and wound up being the disaster that you thought it would be?
About everything. I mean,
Can you narrow it down?
I mean, that's the way it works. When you're looking, when a lot of people were making votes just based on how did it sound in a 6-second soundbite, that doesn't work. You look at just even 2 years ago when we proposed and finalized the 89-cent tax rate. We had people protesting 3 different times saying, oh, that's going to bankrupt the city. Oh, it's going to be this. It's going to be that. It's going to be, oh, the city won't have any money. The sky is falling. Chicken Little. And it's like, no, I looked at the numbers. Here's what's going to happen. Here's how much extra we're still going to have. We're going to be able to give more to our public safety. We're going to actually give more to our frontline educators. And we're going to be able to lower the burden on our citizens for the first time in 20 or 30 years. And it happened. And guess what? The surplus was even bigger than planned. And guess what also happened? What also happened is the city was getting cleaned up because now people saw you're not going to just raise the taxes. So now people saw a house that was derelict or boarded up and said, I'm going to buy that house. That's capital formation. That's how economics and finance works. They said, I'm going to invest in that house and fix it up. And neighborhoods you drive around the city. It happened like that. That's, what you would call supply side economics working in fashion. And
so that's a good example of something that you were in favor of that worked.
Yes.
Now go the other way. Something that you were opposed to that they went through with anyway. One of the things that was brought up to me, and this was before I was engaged, Heritage High School.
Yep. Heritage High School, it's interesting how they talked about things. They talked about, we have to get a new Heritage because the roof leaks. And I talked to several of the school board members. Oh, yeah, we spent millions of dollars fixing the roof because of the leaks. Then they had an engineer, and the engineer, who wasn't an ally, the engineer was actually probably on the other side of most things, and I knew him well, that we had good conversation.
An ally in terms of what?
Well, not like a political ally that's going to say, oh, you're the best. This was kind of somebody who wouldn't, normally kind of feed you good information.
Okay.
He said, Jeff, he said, I did what everybody should do. I went up in the roof when it was raining and saw that it had nothing to do with the roof. It was these, I can't remember what it was called. I knew what the name of it was. These wall plates or something that were leaking and the water was coming through. And it was like, so you put something out there that this is what it is. You spent millions of dollars fixing something that wasn't the problem. And, so with that, now back up before that, the school board, who was all appointed by the Democrats or independents, they would have no amount of money that was enough for school funding. The year before, 2 years before, they said, okay, we don't have enough money from the city council, the government, in order to get a new heritage, $80 million. So let's build a new Sandusky first, Sandusky Middle, for $29 million.
Just because we have some money?
Because we have $29 million, but we don't have 80.
So instead of doing what we need to do, we're
going to do that.
Else.
And I said at the time, I said, look, if you think that's really the priority, you got to focus on that. But if you're going to do one that you can get, it's like you and I sitting here saying, oh, I don't have enough money for a new house, so I'm going to go buy a boat. And those kind of decisions that happen, again, and they happen because, they're made by, volunteers or somebody that likes a 6-second soundbite, and I don't like that. So that was bad. And what has it done? It prolonged and it kept the requirements for taxes for the debt service. Because now you had a $29 million Sandusky Middle School, which now should be the Sandusky Elementary School, quite frankly, because you've lost thousands of kids, and now you could put them in Sandusky Middle School. You now had a newer Heritage High School that even got pushed up even more than it was, because instead of having it where it was, they said, oh, let's move it closer to the street so people can see this Mecca, to another extra 10%, another $8 million on top of the bill.
Just to show it off?
To have it in the corner. I mean, again, it was like, that would be neat, because, again, it's not their money, and they're not the end user, but they want to have a... So with that, I disagreed vehemently on several of those steps. It took us forever to get enough debt service capacity to build a new police headquarters that we finally are able to do, and it's going to open up the end of this month. They were in several different places, and that was needed at a time when all the money was spent elsewhere. So,
on the heritage thing, was told, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I often am, was told that you were the only city council member not to be at the groundbreaking. Was that intentional? Was that a message? Was that...
No, not a lot of, I've been to haven't been to a lot of groundbreakings. I don't go show up at, when they're spending another $5 million on downtown, another thing, or spending money on a new social service building, or, got plenty of better things.
So it wasn't no message?
No.
Okay.
But that was like in 2008. So...
Well,
people are looking back. Oh my goodness, he didn't. Where was he? It's always funny over time too. I'd always hear people say, "Oh, you haven't been in the schools. You haven't." It's like when I go to the schools, I'm not like a normal politician that would trumpet and have everybody there to say, "Look at
the
me,
photo
I'm
op,
here."
right?
The photo op.
Yeah,
That's what they do. I don't do photo ops for that.
You need the photo op.
What I want to do is find objective, factual advice that I can fight for the taxpayers of Lynchburg.
So you come on city council, you're the only Republican, lots of uphill battles, lots of losses. Then things start to change a little bit. Tell me how that evolved.
So I think how that evolved was because of those battles. Because of those battles, because there was somebody out there saying, government, no. Taxpayer, yes. There was somebody out there saying, enough of this stuff. And giving factual, objective things. I'd show up to a meeting, and people would be talking about stuff. Oh, this would be neat. And I said, oh, did you read the report on page 326, how it said paragraph A, how it said this won't do what you're saying? And they went and said, oh, I didn't read the report. It's like, well, so from that, I kept pushing those things and looking objectively, because again, not because I'm getting, some desire to do this, but because when I'm now in government and Dr. Falwell's mission of training champions for Christ, that means when you are there in government, you are not just sitting there as a rubber stamp, but you're actually providing service and providing value and actually reading the stuff, because it's not just for the next election, but it's to create the next generation. And so.
So when you talk about opening eyes, obviously when you're the only Republican, you're opening the eyes of the Democrats?
Open the eyes of not just necessarily the Democrats, because they like to do what they want.
Just the constituents, the people,
the city,
citizens?
the citizens. I mean, I don't know how many times I remember a long time ago, a guy that was an architect for the company, and he got laid off because the hotel downtown wasn't getting any money until I pushed and they showed the audit. And it said, wait a minute, you got $1.4 million from the city taxpayers, and you're telling me that I got to find a new job because you wanted to pay your son, or I mean, it was just lots of things that were opened up, and people are going like, because in government you have thousands of employees, between schools and city, that they're pushing their narrative. And when they're pushing that, that's what the media hears, because that's the truth. Until you have somebody raise their finger and say, I see it differently. And from that, people started seeing that. I remember when Scott Garrett ran back in 2006, he said, man, I was watching this because of popcorn. And he was watching he's watching me in there fighting with the 6 Democrats. And it's a fighting, but, you're debating a point, using objective reasoning rather than just political sound bites.
At some point, did you ever sit there and think to yourself, and obviously you never did it, but did you ever sit there and think to yourself,
oh, every meeting. I know what you're going to ask.
Worth it?
Every meeting.
Meeting. Why am I doing this? It's an uphill battle. I've got my career. I've got all
Absolutely.
these other things going for me.
Probably every meeting.
Really?
Yeah. And leaving, rare times that I'm out there excited because they finally hit a good vote. Most of the time, no. And again, back to Dr. Falwell, it's interesting. These quotes keep coming up every time you register for classes or signing something up. A quote that he had. He said, don't measure a man by his greatness, his wealth, but you measure a man by what it takes to discourage him. And I was discouraged every meeting. I mean, it was like, I'm sick of these. Every word that, I never cussed so much as in politics, about politicians mostly. But with that, I stuck in there because God opened the door and said, keep on going.
Was there a point in time where you really felt like, or a certain or specific instance, where you're like, wow, the tide's turning, things are coming around?
Yes, yeah, it was absolutely. Yeah, it was funny. 2020, the 2020 election. And they had 3 at large.
So you're talking about 15 years into your run, it finally started.
Yes, that's when it happened. Yeah, exactly. So with that,
that's a lot of frustration.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So with that 2020, before that happened, I remember talking to to Randy Nelson, and he said, "Oh, Jeff," he said, "No, the incumbents always win." I said, "No, Randy." He said, "Oh, I'll step down because I'm not running again, but the 2 will definitely win, and it'll open up 1." I said, "Randy, why waste your time? We're going to have all 3." He said, "Oh, no, you're just saying that optimistically." I said, "No, it's good. This is actually going to happen this time." And I focused and worked to that end. I helped the 3 of them, got nominated as Republicans, and got elected that November as Republicans. 2022 is what it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so even longer. And with that, it's like, because of the fact that the city, enough people has heard enough of this high taxes, high spending, for what? For higher poverty rates, more government growth, more potholes, less safety, enough. Our school system tanking as far as the achievement gap, in spite of the $80 million high school and the $29 million. It's like, this throwing money at stuff isn't working. We need accountability. So
Okay, so 2022 is when you felt like it changed.
Absolutely.
You got the three Republicans in.
Yep.
And I guess, this is kind of where my story begins with
Yeah, that's when
council,
you start watching.
because, sitting there like, okay, we've got a bunch of Republicans on city council. This should be great. And then,
Should have been. Yeah.
and I guess really for me, where it started was you didn't get to be named mayor.
And
Walk me through it,
yeah,
please. I'm dying to know.
which is crazy. I mean, it's just because, not because it was me or not because I've earned it or whatever, but because of the fact that it's such a just an illogical decision, not based on anything of fact. You're taking somebody that's been here in the city for 2 years, never even been on council, and you're going to coordinate with the Democrats so you can have something. When you look at narcissism and you look at things like that, but I don't do it that way. I have had a track record of saying, hey, I'm doing something to help the citizens of Lynchburg. I'm not doing this, or otherwise I would have quit a long time ago if it was about me. I think we all can kind of look at that
Okay.
in hindsight.
So you're referencing Stephanie Reed
And Chris Feraldi.
and Chris Feraldi, but Stephanie is the mayor.
She is mayor, and
So-
it was coordinated by because of Chris.
Okay,
Exactly.
so I mean that's the part that, because I'm sitting there and I'm just assuming, right, being a guy who doesn't follow this, doesn't live in the city, right? It wasn't really super important to me, but just assumed you had been there, and
That's
again,
what everybody assumed, and so that's
and I'm guessing you were kind of assuming as well that was that the plan? Did they go behind your back? What?
yeah.
How did?
I mean, Chris was again that's him, and that's what happens in politicians that want to seek for them. It could have been a whole lot smoother if we would have just.
So he coordinated it, but he
Good, the
wasn't
two-
the mayor.
Oh, he's vice mayor.
Okay,
and he's
but-
getting the two Democrats to vote with them, which is.
So could he not have done it where he would have wound up being the mayor? Did he
heck
not want to be the mayor?
No, they would. The two Democrats wouldn't have voted for him.
Okay.
So, I mean, so
So he got it so he could be vice mayor.
yeah.
And Stephanie goes along with it, and this is all, what, behind your back?
Yeah, and I saw it coming, just like a few days ahead of time, because people were talking and saying, "I can't believe it that you're really." It's bad on them, worse than it is on me, and then now look what's happened with it, the chaos, because you have somebody who's in there as a novice that now believes everything the government says. They don't have a track record of looking objectively and saying, I know you think this will be helpful, government, but it's not going to be, because you can look at things objectively. You have a pattern of looking at how government spends money or how government collects money. And so with that, there's been lots of, simple things like Robert's Rules of Order or running a meeting or having the history. Somebody who's been here that doesn't even know necessarily some of the transitions that have happened. I've been here for 40 years, versus someone been here for a couple of years. And with that, not saying that they couldn't do it, but right out of the gate, when you're automatically coordinating with the other party, Congress happened, and the state would never vote for the Speaker of the House or their leadership by getting the Democrats to vote with the Republicans, or the vice versa.
We would hope.
Oh, they never have done that. I mean, look what happened in Congress when they didn't like, a few of them didn't like the Speaker of the House. What'd they do? How many votes did they have?
Oh, quite a few.
16, 15, 16. Did any time the Democrat voted for the Republican? Did any time the Republican vote for the Democrat?
That was one of the concerns, though, right? Was at some point
But
there.
it wasn't going to happen because what it is, it seals the fate of the person that's acting like they're a Republican or acting like they're a Democrat, if they care more about the position than doing what they said they're going to
Right.
do with their, being loyal to their party and their principles.
So it's 2022. The Republicans finally take control of City
Absolutely.
Council.
Yeah.
And Chris Feraldi, according to you, coordinates this thing where Stephanie becomes the mayor, gets the Democrats to help them out, and then the next thing it's the Republicans are fighting, and it's kind of you and Marty, who we'll talk
Yeah.
about Marty in a minute, but you and Marty and finally get control, and now the Republicans are going head to head, and you guys actually got a lot accomplished despite the fact that all we remember is the bickering and
Yeah.
the name calling and the insults, and I mean there was a lot of drama.
Yeah, it certainly was. And you look, so not only was that an issue, what they're doing, who's going to be the mayor and vice mayor, the leadership, and again, those lots of it, people think it's just a title and name. The important thing is meeting with the city staff, with the city manager. Those are the important meetings to help set the agenda. That's what's critical.
Okay, because I was going to ask that. I mean, it's important who's the mayor.
It is important who's the mayor that is going to actually represent the citizens and council to the city manager, because they have private meetings that aren't open to the public because there's not, under FOIA, there's not a quorum. So you have private meetings with the city manager where you say, hey, here's the direction we want to go. Like, for example, this last budget, we now have 6 council members that are Republican. So it's built. With that being the case, 6 council members that campaigned on the taxes are too high. And what does the city manager do? He presents a budget with raises the taxes. And with that, there should have been the meeting that said, city manager, no, you're not even presenting this. If you are, take your walking papers. We need somebody who can do it. If you can't live within your means, if you can't live within more revenue already that's baked into the cake, you have to raise taxes on top of it, to our citizens. No, that doesn't, figure it out. And he didn't. And with that, that's where the mayor would be very important to say, you ain't doing this. We're not going down that path. We're not going to be wasting a bunch of time. So a couple years ago, like I mentioned, the 89-cent tax rate was not the mayor, but I did that without being the mayor. I met with the city manager. I had 4 people sign a letter. I said, city manager, you're not presenting a budget like this. I know you did. Here's what the tax rate we're going to do. Here's what we want. Some big picture things, not micromanaging, but saying we want the tax rate at 89 cents versus $1.11. We want to give more to public safety because we recognize the retention and recruiting issues that are happening. We also need to make sure that the frontline educators are compensated so they can deal with all of these issues to help improve scores. He hated it, but he did it. And do you remember how much squawking there was about that? None. He presented it. We voted. The first vote was 4-3. The 2 Democrats and Stephanie voted against it. Second reading, 5-2. It should happen again. So that chair is important, or at least that driving perspective, that somebody that understands finance, understands economics, and isn't going to cave to bureaucrat speak. That can look at the facts and say, nah, I know you say that, you think that is true, but here I got the receipts. Here's the reality of what happens.
So obviously the experience part plays into it. And you felt that, you had the experience to be the mayor. It works out such as it did, that you weren't.
But I still did what I was elected to do. Still fighting for the taxpayers. Still fighting for improving the city. Still fighting for trying to make sure we improve our test scores and make sure our city is safe. So even not sitting there, still did it.
You and Marty, it felt like, right? Because I wasn't there. That's what I want to hear from you. But it felt like you and Marty kind of paired up together, Chris and Stephanie, and a lot of friction, a lot of tension, a lot of back and forth. Again, like I said, my understanding is a lot got accomplished. But there was a lot of drama.
Yeah,
and it was you guys. Could you have done something differently to bring everybody together?
We talked, you opened up about my background. What was my background again? I'm forgetting. Oh, yeah. So for 20 years, for how many of our Democrat mayors we've had, every 2 years, they recognized my area of expertise. We have 2 committees, Finance and Physical Development Committee. They not only put me on the Finance Committee, they said, Jeff, we want you to be the chairman of Finance Committee. Not because of quid pro quo, because I voted for them for mayor, because I didn't, but because they were thinking of the best interests of the city and putting people in their best role. A guy who's got 5 degrees and designations in finance, teaches finance, is, you probably want him on the Finance Committee as opposed to Physical Development Committee. Very first thing out of the gate, not only did having me as the chairman of the Finance Committee, took me off the Finance Committee completely, and then doesn't even put Marty on a committee. You look at this and you go, how do you, when you get kicked in the nuts, and then they're still, oops, edit that. And then what happens is they keep doing it. What do you do? How do you reach out? I tried, and that's, again, that 89-cent tax rate was after all of that. Because, again, it was never anything personal or wanting some notoriety politically. For my 20 years, I lived every vote being a champion for Christ and making sure I'm voting for the best interests as I see it for city government, running city government.
Marty Mischins. Wow, I don't even know where to begin with Marty.
Yeah.
I guess we just heard recently that his lawsuit against the city got tossed. He's made a lot of waves. You talk about doing what's in the best interests of the city. Is that what he's in it for?
I believe so. I mean, he looks at the facts. So I'm not an apologist for anybody, but he does his homework. He does look at the facts. He understands that he was elected to represent the taxpayers of Lynchburg. He was elected to represent making sure that we're safe, making sure we have good educators. And that's what he was trying to fulfill. And so with that, you have personalities that come on and whatnot. I remember when I first got in office, everybody always called me the bull in the china shop. It's what happens when you're young and you're wanting to do good. You're presenting what is good. But then you have people that almost have blinders on. And it's a different thing. It's like, do you not see what I just presented? No, because this person said something different, so we believe them. It's like, and so with that, you have personality clashes and whatnot. So,
and you touched on Chris and Stephanie earlier, and I'm going to infer, but I'll let you correct me, that you don't feel like they're doing what's in the best interest of the city.
I actually don't, to be honest. I mean, I helped both of them get elected.
Okay.
And right after both of them got elected, they said, oh, well, hey, let's do this because I'll get credit for something. That was a terrible 39% increase in spending in the budget. And I can take credit for it because the Democrats are already voting for it. And then Stephanie, singing to council when you got all the citizens are saying, don't do this. This is wrong. I think they could be at some point, but so much of it has been, to me, I can be very wrong, but to me it appears as self-serving. I mean, you can kind of see a difference. You're doing this radio show. We're sitting here talking, not so I can get some notoriety or so I can, run for chief dog catcher, but so we can actually talk about important things. And, so to me, it just kind of seemed, especially when you're some of the actions that were taken, when you look and you say, oh, well, I'm voting against this because it'll raise, the 89-cent tax rate Stephanie fought against. It passed, and then she votes for it. Oh, this is a great thing. I mean, it's like, let's look at facts. Let's look at objectively. And again, I recognize people can change their mind. But I'm watching the latest fiasco. Rather than just setting the real estate tax rate like you should without raising it, where'd this thing come from? Raising the lodging tax like to the moon. without without
Yeah, the
any
highest in the
public
whole
hearing.
country,
the whole
right?
world,
By-
yeah,
by
intergalactic, yeah. So if some Martians want to come, hey, we got their rates. Their rates may be a little higher. So anyway, yeah, just with that, well, why don't you just do what's kind of a proven thing? Why don't you just go down a path? Why don't you just tell the city manager a long time ago before he came out with that budget? Why didn't you try to work with Larry, the mayor, and Marty and Jacqueline and Kurt to say, let's equalize the tax rate, and then we'll figure out what we can do. So anyway, everybody, and I know everybody's going to say, oh, it's his fault, it's their fault. It always takes two to tango. But you look at the very first vote, and you look at when you get off the train track. If you worked to get back on the train track, that would have been good. If you worked and said, hey, I know we coordinated with the Democrats, but here's why, and here we'd like to. No, it kept on going.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that because, there was a lot of talk about, well, and I heard Stephanie say, well, that's all water under the bridge, talking about, and you wrestled for real rather than the WWE stuff. But I grew up with that, and I don't know if you followed it at all, but Bret Hart, the Montreal screw job.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
that's kind of
Yeah.
how I'm, comparing.
I remember the claw, or the Baron von Raschke.
But well, anyway, I mean, there's a situation with Bret Hart, and he was supposed to win the title, but he was leaving the WWE. So the referee did a quick count, and he wound up getting screwed. And that's kind of how I envisioned you not getting elected mayor. Like all of a sudden, there's this thing that goes on, but then after all that happens, Stephanie comes out and says, hey, this is water under the bridge. Can't we all come together? And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, man, that's easy to say after you do that. But the flip side is, I think a lot of people maybe mistakenly, but understandably, thought there may have been some sour grapes on your part as to why the feud continued between, kind of your side and their side.
Can I have any kind of speculation? But I mean, what you just saw what I mentioned about the 89-cent tax rate, that it was regardless of the position, But when you keep on going, when you have agenda items that you want on the agenda, normally it was always you have two council members say, hey, we want this on there. It used to be one council member asked for it to be on, never put on the agenda. When you say, hey, I would like to speak, and you say, oh, no, you can't speak because you already spoke 20 minutes ago. I mean, it kept on going and going. And again, I did try to kind of let water off the duck's back, but I mean, it keeps on coming and coming, and you try. We had a meeting with a pastor even, and it was like kind of looking, saying, hey, why don't you try to make amends? And Jeff is. I mean, it's just, so it's a little different, but the way it is. I mean, the politicians, sometimes it's, the sad thing is about politicians, you get lots of ego and you get lots of narcissism that, if you try to share something with somebody objectively, they take that as an insult. And with that, with my finance and economics, one of my favorite authors is Thomas Sowell. And he said, if you care about somebody, you tell them the truth. If you care about yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. I've tried to always tell the truth.
Then last year, you decide you're not going to run for re-election and you're going to step down from city council. Talk about that decision.
So with that, so working hard, I got nominated as a Republican. Things went fine. My wife has always said, look at, when's this going to end? With my whole time knowing her, I've been in city government. Whole marriage, I've been in city government. And it's like, I'd like that to be done. And me too. So it's like I took it from one Republican to 6 Democrats. I've now helped usher in the transition to 1 Democrat and 6 Republicans. Sure, some of the Republicans are by maybe name only or maybe by, title only or whatever, but there are 6 Republicans. May not get along as swimmingly as they should, but it's time to step down. It's time to say, hey, I've done my part. I now have can leave happily. I was the nominee, and at that time I had been looking for. I don't want to just leave and have a vacuum there. I wanted to find somebody that was going to do similar work like I would do, that would take it seriously. They have a good understanding of the role of government, have the good understanding of finance, and I found Kurt Deemer, and said, and he at the time he was willing and able, and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do, and I'm glad I did.
Was it a tough decision?
No. I mean, it's, you look back in time and you think, if I were there now, it would have been a lot smoother. There wouldn't have been this kind of ruckus going on, because it would have been,
Why? Why?
6 Republicans that are, and you got 2 that sometimes side with the Democrat. Sometimes you wouldn't have had that. You'd had probably 6-1 on most votes. You wouldn't have had that kind of silliness. So I don't know if it's personality or what's happening, but I think most of the things would pass probably 6-1 or maybe even 7-0.
So considering all that and how clearly proud you are of the fact that you started out as the only one and then you worked to get the Republican majority, and now you see where we're at, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. But you just said if you would have stayed, you think things would have gone much smoother.
I think so.
Why?
Well, I think.
I mean, they didn't go very smooth while you were there.
Not there because it was. They had the 2 of them with the 2 Democrats, so they had a majority, 4-3.
Okay.
With the election of a new Republican, Jacqueline Timmer in Ward 1, that's now 6 Republicans to 1, so that would have been 4-3.
So you're saying the 2, and you mean Chris and Stephanie.
Yeah, if they wanted to still vote with the Democrat, Sterling Wilder,
it wouldn't have mattered.
It wouldn't have mattered. And with that, I think they would have then said, no, we're not going to do that because we're never going to win the vote, and we'll vote with you anyway.
I was going to ask if it pains you, and that's probably a ridiculous way to put it, but the circus-like atmosphere. I mean, heck, when Dennis and I were doing the sports line, I mean, there were nights where we talked about city council.
Oh, when you're watching sports?
That had nothing to do with our show, but it's just what everybody was talking about, and, the name calling, right? The alleged name calling, whatever happened, and there was a lot of speculation about all that. But I mean, it really turned into a circus. Did that, I was going to ask if it pained you, but did it embarrass you at all? I mean, that's not the way government's supposed to run, and you finally get the majority, and man.
That's sad. It doesn't embarrass me because it's individuals, it's individual adults making their individual choices. What does pain me is to say that, I wish I would have done a little more due diligence before I endorsed these people. Because some of them didn't have much experience. They hit in the city. So with that, kind of like I mentioned a long time ago, when I first ran, it wasn't because I was so wanting to get into government so I could be on the camera and sing to everybody. My goal was to live a good life, run a good business, help the community in my community service areas. From that, people said, hey, we want you to do the next step. We want you to be involved in government, as opposed to somebody trying to make it themselves. So with this, I was kind of making the assumption that they were viewing the world the same way I did, because they said, I want to run as a Republican. To me, that means something just in that fashion. That means that you care about limited government. You care about individual responsibility. You care about private property rights. You care about these things. And so you kind of make those assumptions,
So any regrets as far as not running this past year? If you think that with you in there, things could have gone much smoother, and despite the chaos, the circus-like atmosphere of the previous couple of years, you could have gotten things more normalized and back to a civilized council.
Yeah, I think that could have, but then the time is like when? Okay, if not now, when? So wait 2 years? I'm, when you've given your all and you've run your race like you should have, and God says, hey, I got another path for you, because I was trying to find them before I even had the primary. And it was like, and I couldn't. I mean, I tried to find a good replacement. I didn't find a replacement till after. Once that was there, it's like, great. Now I can be at peace making a good decision and being done. Sure, there could have been difference. I think it would have been a heck of a lot smoother, without a question, without a doubt. But when's the time frame? So that's another 4-year term, which then leads to another 8-year term? Or am I going to serve for another 2 years and then retire, and then they'll have a special election or somebody else? It just, I thought this was a good time.
So your read on council now. We've got a new mayor.
Yep.
I don't know how that's going, right? I mean, we're hearing all kinds of things, and Chris is talking about him or not talking about him, or Brian's reading stuff into it. I'm getting emails. I'm like, why am I getting emails?
Yeah.
So
Waiting for someone to come off the top of the rope.
Yeah, I mean,
off the top rope.
It's crazy. It's crazy. But I mean, as you sit back, no longer directly involved, what's your read on council right now and where it's at and where it's heading?
So when you get in any kind of government and you get people that are elected that are basically volunteers, right? I mean, you're getting paid pittance, $10,000 a year, and you have lots of requirements that you should do, lots of stuff to do, and you have thousands of employees. And these thousands of employees can meet together every day if they want. They're getting paid, they have benefits, they have consultants they can hire. And they can write reports, they have media attention, all of these things versus these volunteers on city council. And so when you have this huge bureaucracy that recognizes there's 7 people, and if we focus our attention on this one or these 2 or these 3, we can get what we want. And it doesn't matter who's in charge. With that, what's needed is for people that are elected to truly understand that their job isn't to represent the bureaucracy, the thousands of employees. Their job is to represent the thousands of taxpayers to government. Lots of times they think it's just they're a mouthpiece. Government thinks we need to build a school. Yes, let's build a school. Yes, we need to be a cheerleader for them. That's the opposite. We need to be a cheerleader for the people paying the bills.
A lot of attention obviously gets focused on city council. But you touched on earlier the city manager, right? Where you guys as Republicans all ran on the tax cut, and he presents the tax hike.
Which any I don't care who you are, but if you're a Democrat city manager association, you would look at that and go, that wasn't very smart, because your job is to understand the wishes of the governing body, which the governing body is elected by the citizens. You should kind of read that. You shouldn't put these things out there. I had the only city manager that I had for the longest time was Kim Payne. Mm-hmm. And, we butted heads a lot. I saw him just again the other day, and I said, Kim, let me tell you. I said, I apologize, but I got to tell you that you're absolutely by far the best city manager we've ever had. Because you would see things ahead of time. You wouldn't put council in a box. You would recognize that you work for the majority, the 4, and you would present that so they would look good, not that you're pushing your way and try to keep on having another vote so you can manipulate them. And it's, you don't know what you don't know. And so you have so many bureaucrats that go to school on doing nothing else but trying to manipulate these elected officials. And it's easy to do because you're a volunteer. Mm-hmm. And they don't maybe have that, much training in economics, or maybe they haven't been in the city long, or lots of things.
Well, and to your point earlier, not everybody's always reading the whole proposal, and they're just counting on what someone tells them. Oh, here's what it says. We see that in Congress all the time, right? There's a 1,000-page bill, and they're voting on it, and I'm sitting there going,
"You just got it last night."
Yeah, how do you read 1,000 pages? Well, we have people in, but in this case, the city manager and others are kind of coercing, maybe the wrong word, maybe it's not, but influencing, or hey, here's what it says, and kind of giving their perspective on what it is.
Because that's what they want.
That's what they want.
They're pushing for a bigger bureaucracy, and so
we're right now, Lynchburg, city of Lynchburg. On a scale of 1 to 10, where's it at?
Right now, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably a 7.5 to maybe an 8. About 5 years ago, it had probably been a 3 because of the fact that it kept every year. Anytime there was property growth, they would raise the taxes. And so where did the next year's growth go? Came out to forest. And you look at all the growth in forest. You look at all the growth in Campbell County because people said enough of this. We're going elsewhere. And now with this, when you change those policies that you recognize that we're not going to just keep on putting a bigger burden on our citizens that have their houses and their properties here, we're going to alleviate that. And property values go through the roof. And that makes everybody happy. That makes everybody wealthy. That makes the city have enough revenue to pay for the things, the services that you need. It makes for them not to do the things they don't need. You know, then they never ask or do a survey. You know, they always say the quality of life. Well, the quality of whose life? I mean, do you?
Fair question.
I mean, it's always, quality of life. We got to spend that for a new pool or a new garden club or whatever. Okay, those 10 people that use that, great, or the 1,000 people or whatever number.
Right.
You know, eventually you got to say, it's government spending money, so we should really focus on public service. You know.
So it's an 8 out of 10, which is really good. You're a professor, and that's a solid B.
Yeah, and it could keep on getting better if
what needs to change?
Well, I mean, what needs to change is this budget. I mean, the easiest thing to do would have been for them to come out and say, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to equalize the real estate tax rate. Assessments went up. Rather than just taking all that money and spending it wherever government thinks, we're going to come out of the gate and say, hey, we're going to equalize that tax rate. And we're going to have more revenue to do other things, and we'll still keep on focusing on that. What that does is sends a really strong message for people that are thinking about investing in the city, saying, wow, these people really care about us. They care about being fiscally responsible and good stewards. That helps for the growth even more.
Okay, so how does that change? Does someone need to go? Does someone else need to come in? Does someone need to change? You know,
it's funny when I was pushing for the 3 Republicans, all 3 of them together, and I campaigned for all 3 of them. I put together signs. I helped all 3 of them get elected. And people said, "Oh, all you really need is 2, because you'd have 4 Republicans. You don't need all 3." And I said, "Absolutely. You don't know how Republicans work." And sure enough, we now have 6 Republicans.
and it's still
It's like, how has that seriously happened? You should have passed that budget a long time ago. You should have had no drama. You should have came out with a tax equalization rate, figured out what you want to do and what you don't want to do, and go home and be done. Now it's just, because it's almost like, well, look what I did. Oh, this was my proposal. Who cares? It should be for serving the citizens of Lynchburg, making us go from a 7.5 and an 8 to an 8.5 to a 9. Let's do that.
How's our new mayor doing?
A little tougher, but, so I haven't watched many things. I don't like when he attacks one side of the dais. I don't like when he, doesn't allow for free and open discussion. He doesn't allow for things being put on the agenda like it should be. Changing who's on committees after they're appointed. I think the Finance Committee had it right when they said, here's what we're going to do. Rather than government figuring out how they're going to spend all this money, the first step of a budget is what's your estimated revenue. I teach finance. Forecasting, that's the very first step everywhere.
You got to know how much you have before you know how much you can spend.
And the government does the opposite. So now we're going to say, okay, we need this much money because I want to take 2 vacations, or I want a new boat, or you don't do it. And so now we got to work another job, and we got to have our revenue. No, you look at what your revenue is going to be. Without putting an extra burden on the citizens, look at what the growth is going to be because of the capital investment, because of the meals tax, all the other car taxes, and look at what the revenue is going to be. From that, now you can decipher, how do we want to allocate these resources?
So if they do it backwards and they say, here's what we need to get this much money, the only way that a city can get revenue is how?
Taxes. I mean, they don't produce anything. And so that's why when you look at economics and you have that understanding, you recognize that all taxes are bad. Some are worse than the others. So, I mean, because they're not producing something. You know, you're advertising on the radio stations or whatever. Any of that is because you're helping somebody. They voluntarily agree to pay for advertising because you're promoting them. You have two people agree. How is government? Because any transaction happened, or because somebody hit a button and said, I'm going to take some of your money. And so with that, that's why you kind of want to try to minimize, that role.
So Mary was telling me earlier that there was something maybe a few weeks ago that said there was going to be an announcement about you, your future. What's next for you?
It's kind of neat and kind of funny. So it was at the Republican City Committee meeting. Okay. So with that, they made the agenda and said, hey, Jeff Helgeson's got an announcement.
Right.
And so I go to the, so before I went to the meeting, I had some people calling, and the chairman said, oh, people are speculating. And it's like, it was nothing intentionally deceptive or anything. It was making an announcement of, sadly, one of our city committee members passed away. One of our city committee members gave a coin collection to the Lynchburg City Committee. That's what I was sharing.
That was the announcement.
That was the announcement. To thank him for his wonderful work.
A lot of speculation about what's next for you, though.
And so with that, it was lots of that speculation. Yeah. I thought, oh my goodness, you got, if I say something, people are, assuming. So it was funny, as after I presented that, a lot of people left. A lot of the, the inside baseball politicians, their staff and whatnot. It was like, all of a sudden they left. It was like, you guys really thought it was going to be some kind of, this was a great thing, that this citizen, who was a member of the committee, cared so much about the committee that he left a very large coin collection to the committee, who got to, been able to sell it and utilize those proceeds. I mean, that
didn't excite anybody.
Oh, that didn't. It excited about, is he going to run for Congress?
Right.
Is he running for this? Is he, it's like, hey, I'm not, everybody else does that speculation, not me. I'm kind of doing the job. Everybody speculated, oh, well, you were conniving for being mayor, or you said about this. I've been what I said. I still fought for the taxpayers of Lynchburg, even after the people that I helped get elected, for lack of better words, kind of, were two-faced. In spite of that, I still worked for the good of the citizens of Lynchburg.
It's fun not being on council
anymore. Oh, absolutely. And, I don't watch. I did go to one meeting and talked about the benefits of setting the tax equalization rate, and reminded them how fantastic this was. What we did 2 years ago should be replicated like that. You'd have short meetings. You'd have less of a burden on the citizens. You'd have continuous growth and capital investment.
Short meetings.
And short meetings.
That's a novel concept.
Yeah. And just so.
I mean, yelling and screaming in the hallway. I mean, we got all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah.
You look happy not to be a part of it anymore.
Oh, absolutely. And the good thing is I don't get to watch it. It's funny. My wife now, I want to watch that. It's like, when I'm not there.
For the entertainment value, right? I mean,
it's interesting. My background, we talked about wrestling and finance. I think both of them kind of set the stage for government. You look at the facts and you don't give up. You keep on going. And wrestling is not notoriety. I mean, actual collegiate wrestling, even WWE is.
Yeah.
Collegiate wrestling isn't, and so it's not a high profile sport. It's not like you're going to go into the next,
right.
Be a pro football player or a pro basketball player.
Right. I've learned since moving south, the professional stuff isn't called wrestling, it's wrestling.
Yeah. It's wrestling.
I learned that. Are you done with politics?
I'm never done with doing the right thing. I'm never done, because when we talked earlier, when somebody asks you to do something, you try to say yes because it adds another key on your ring of life experiences. I'm not seeking anything for me.
Is there one position, or is there one office that you think that you would be well suited for that you could really help to continue to do the job that you want to do?
Just whatever's before me at the time. I try to do whatever I'm doing. I try to do it well because I, again, try to follow Dr. Falwell's mission of being a champion for Christ, whatever I'm doing. So I do, I do put a lot into things. You know, I don't just show up and hit a button or just not read this stuff. You know, when we have auditors that come, I'm questioning them on page 326. It said this, or, you know, this presentation about the school consultants, you know, what happened here. Every day I'm still very thankful that what I have done, lots of these things still keep on going. You know, we just got a new thing in the mail the other day with our polling place changed. And my wife said, "Oh, our polling place changed. How did that happen?" I said, "You're looking at them. Here's what I suggested. Once we moved the lines, I wanted it to be there, and sure enough, that's happened." Mm. You know, you look at these things, and you look at Windhurst. I was on the planning commission when this happened. There, I remember Bill Jamerson had a bunch of apartments that were one place, but he didn't have it in the plans. In the plans that he proffered the site plan, it wasn't in there. And after the meeting, I said, or before the meeting, I said, "Hey, you said there were 7. There's only 6 in this drawing, and when you proffer that site plan, that's what it is." I looked at the details even when I was on the planning commission. This used to be just a road right out here. They spent $2 million on improving the road, and look what's happened here. Mm. Hundreds of millions of dollars of capital investment that happened here, not paid by government, not paid by tax, but paid by people investing here. And what a good place that's been.
So as far as your future, never say never.
Never say never, absolutely not. But I'm going to keep on teaching. I'm glad to see the next generation, you know, learning and doing and moving forward and recognizing the importance of conservative principles. They never fail. You know, spending all your money today versus saving it. Did you ever go wrong by saving money? You do go wrong by spending it. It's not as fun. Yeah, you do go wrong by spending it.
Saving isn't always as fun.
Yeah,
you're right. You got to. And
seeing this next generation, I'm very optimistic. I'm glad I'm there to help kind of lend my experience, and not just from a guy who's 28 and just got his PhD from Ohio State here, but somebody who's had lots of experience.
Jeff, thank you. This was fun.
This was fun. We had a great time, and
appreciate you dropping by, and appreciate your time.
Good deal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.